Distributech 2023, one of the sponsors of these interviews, and these are interviews with thought leaders from around North America and the globe. Our sponsors are H2 Scan. H2 Scan is the leading sensor manufacturer for hydrogen sensing in a lot of different applications, in transformers, in battery room safety, in processes and safety, in industrial, and in the future hydrogen economy. So I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank all of our guests, and I hope you enjoy this interview. My next guest is Matt Carrara. He is the newly elected president of Doble. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you.
And as I said earlier, I know Doble Engineering, but it's not your old Buick anymore. It is a different company, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. But first, before we get started, tell me a little bit about your career in the power industry.
Well, so I'm new to the power industry specifically. I've been working at Doble for less than probably 2.5 months in the role of president. Prior to that, I worked for Schneider Electric in their instrumentation and analyzers division. So I ran a business that we predominantly operated in the space of oil and gas, food and beverage, pharmaceutical. And then recently jumped to Doble, again, literally December 1st.
Well, welcome to the world.
Thank you.
It's a very dynamic time to be part of the power industry.
Yes.
So at Doble, when you took on the role as president, there had to be I'm going to leave. How long were you with Schneider?
9.5 years.
So yeah. I'm doing something that I've been doing a long time. I'm happy doing it. Now I'm going to make this jump to president where the profile is going to go up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the reasons for you to take on this challenge personally.
Well, personally, I think from a real personal aspect, it was about being a president of an organization. So, for me, that was always the last rung on the ladder for me from a career perspective. So when the opportunity came up, I jumped at it, but I took the job because of the industry. Okay. I mean, getting into an industry that is growing dramatically, that we're seeing just great innovation and just leadership across, all the facets of it, was the reason why I want to go into the industry. The reason why I went to Doble was the culture. The organization is very strong. There is a lot of thought leadership, but there's also a lot of knowledge and history, as you know, in the organization going back 100 years. So the combination of being able to take an organization that's strong and take it to the next level, coupled with the culture and coupled with a fast-paced industry, all of it just came to me at the perfect storm.
Yeah, one of your engineers, Tony McGrail,
yes,
is a dear friend, and Tony and I actually met on a panel that we were at, and he was presenting, and I thought, he is a lot smarter than me, so I have to be a lot funnier than him, But you got some incredible people there, and I know I know some of the company acquisitions that the company has made, so we were competitors in the past, and you appreciate a good competitor. So our industry, the power industry, has gone through a lot of stability. We've been very boring, stable demand, nothing's really changing. And then two things have hit. One of them, the supply chain issues hit from everybody at COVID. We still have those, so they're dealing with that. But we have challenges now in the utility industry we never had before. We've got this hockey stick curve of demand. I know that Bloomberg announced like a week ago that their EV adoption that they thought would take is now 2.4 to 2.6 times what they thought it was going to be. That changes everything. Oh, yes. The demand of power, the ability to put stable systems together, resiliency, reliability, all of those are the issues the industry is dealing with. As you've come in, you've had to now start to look at the industry and say, what are the problems? How do you see the issues within the power industry, utilities primarily, and are there any more that they need to be dealing with?
Well, I think touching on the supply chain one first, we had that issue when I came on board. Now we've managed to get through it because they were dealing with it for the prior 12 months. I think the problem that suppliers are going to see is now that problem's starting to go away, the backlogs are huge.
Oh yeah.
So then we're coupled and we're struggling with as organizations, how do you get the backlog down? Which leads to you need people in order to help get the backlog down. So one of the challenges we see as a manufacturer is mainly just how do we get the capacity to meet the demand that we're seeing in the market. And that's one of the major things that I'm working on, within Doble, is making sure that we have the ability, as the demand ramps up, we have the supply chain in place in order to meet that demand. I would say from, being new to this industry and new to this show, I always like to find out that it shows there's a theme, right? And I think the things that I gleaned so far from walking the floor, I think the industry's going, and it's a background that I had at my prior organization, is around data. And getting data, getting the analytics around it, doing predictive analytics. So one of the things that I'm going to be focused on at Doble is how do we take all the great product that we have, all the great hardware that we have through all these acquisitions that you referenced, and how do we take all that information and put it in one spot for the user or the customer to end up saying, oh, based on all that data, I need to take this action or take that action. So I found that as I walked around the show. You talked about EVs before. I think after 22 or 23 EV booths, I realized that EV chargers was going to be a big thing as well. So, and as a person who has two EVs, I could appreciate that. So,
so it's interesting. 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, whatever it was, at Distributech and at IEEE, a big thing was you saw drones.
Yes.
I don't see any drones.
I saw one booth only.
Okay, right? I mean, seriously, they were flying all over the place. 3 years, a year before that, IoT was everywhere. IoT, you don't see that anywhere. So we begin to adopt these things a lot quicker than we would think we do. Today, it seems like everybody's trying to offer a full integrated solution, but not a sole integrated solution. I mean, we got to integrate with you, and because they realize it's too complex for any one company, any one manufacturer to make. So open architecture, and what you said, big data. We're going to come back to big data because it is increasing, again, just like they're saying this is the hockey stick of energy demand, this is the hockey stick of data that they're having to deal with when they're having staffing shortages, because it's hard for them to hire the engineers. Even though it's a sexier industry, it's hard for the utility industry to hire engineers, so they're having to do more with less.
Yeah, and I think you see that in probably any industry, especially the ones that I came from in oil and gas. You have a workforce that's exiting, that has all the knowledge. You have the younger generation come in that's more in tune to IIoTs, more included to big data, but without that knowledge, they don't know how to adapt the data and understand what it does. So one of the things, again, that we need to understand is how do we take all this proliferation of data that exists and put enough knowledge into it so the new user, the new customer knows when ABC happens, I have to do X, Y, and Z. And that's one of the areas, I mean, anybody can build a software platform, but an intuitive one's the challenge.
So I know you're recently new to the role, but you had to look at the website, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to put you on the spot right now. The next step, I think, as I've seen Doble grow and challenge, is the acquisition of companies, the integration of like when you bought Morgan Schaefer, I don't see Morgan Schaefer anymore. I see Doble solutions and everything. So from a branding standpoint, you do that. But it has to also, you've got to now bring these disparate units together. Tell me a little bit about your seeing and your vision for what you want to have. You've solved the supply side issues.
So it's a real good question, and we actually had a meeting on this a couple of weeks ago around, we have all these acquisitions, we have all these brands, but what does it mean to the market? What does it mean to the customer? So we are going to be undergoing a series of, I won't say changes, but more focus around what does Doble mean to the industry, and how does all these brands, when they come together, support the customer? And I think because the speed at which the acquisitions were done in the middle of COVID, a lot of that, and I refer to it as stitching of the quilt, wasn't complete. So
your website was an absolute nightmare. I mean, it was a nightmare of, who is that?
The thing that's interesting is, so when I was interviewing for the job, I couldn't figure it out. And so I went into the interview and I'm just like, please take this feedback. I looked at your website before I came in, and I still can't figure out the hierarchy of business. And we're actually going to be looking at a unified website coming out. I think it's in 6 months, 6 to 8 months. But then I'm going to be working strongly again on the messaging of all that and what it means to the industry.
I do want to say, I know Brian is a friend. I want to say, Brian, you did a great job with a lot of, you would hire, every time you got something right, they buy another company, right?
Exactly.
So you've had a hard time doing it. But that's good to hear. So making it a cohesive whole. One of the pedigrees I think about when I think about Doble is Doble engineering.
Yes.
I mean, your engineers were problem solvers. That was a go-to source. If the utility had a problem, get a Doble engineer on the phone, get him out there. that's a great pedigree to have,
Yes.
right? Because that is still a need today. People need to know that they can trusted advisor.
Yes.
People know what I'm going through, and they're not going to try to give me a one-stop solution that I can't integrate with everything else. So that's one of the challenges that Doble's going to have, and you have a great pedigree to start with. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking about this in the booth yesterday. We have all this knowledge, and sometimes we're afraid to tell people we have that much knowledge.
Tell them you do have it. Yeah, I agree.
So as part of this sort of brand unification and messaging, we're looking at, is there a tagline we can create that Doble is X? And that becomes sort of a branding and messaging platform for us. But one of the things I think we need to do is get more of our engineers out in public, because the knowledge base in that business is incredible.
Yeah, and Doble Institute, where you can begin to train other people up in that knowledge and give it away. I want to specifically then switch gears again, because I'm going back to, I'm just going to, the problems that utilities are facing is this demand curve, decarbonization, decentralization, digitalization, all of these things in the midst of resiliency issues. We have tremendous problems with, global warming is creating storms that are worse. You got fires in California. Resiliency is bringing the grid back up after it goes down, and reliability is keeping it from going down.
Going down,
right?
yes.
They are responsible for both, and we're not doing a very good job of it. Texas just went through another freeze, right? They did it about 2 years ago.
2 years ago,
Yes. So these poor utility companies that have 50 different, in the United States, 50 different regulatory organizations telling them, hey, your rates are based on capital spending.
Yes.
And that's not the solution anymore. Capital spending is one of the solutions, but what we've got to do is harden the infrastructure. We've got to make it more flexible to adopt DER.
Yep.
It's a series of problems that they're going through that if you were retiring, you just go ahead and take your early retirement. Because I'm not so sure the older generation of staid silos in utilities is going to work. Talk about just your personal philosophy of how should you look, how should Doble look at an industry undergoing that kind of change, and I do mean it's generational change, undergoing that. Make a pitch for why Doble should be part of that solution.
Well, I think if you look at what we're strong at, which is, specifically in the transformer area, doing measurements and diagnostics and making recommendations back to the user. I think where Doble is strong is how do we expand that to the point where we are the trusted advisor in the industry. But I want to touch back on your comment about sort of the hockey stick. I mean, what we're seeing is, as you know, the grid is old, and we're layering on the grid a whole bunch of new technologies from charges. We have a group that's within Doble that does solar and wind farm measurements in advance of installing a wind farm. So you're putting all this pressure on the grid, and at the same time, the grids are falling, the grids are failing. So I think for where I think we need to focus as an organization is what products and what other types of solutions can I, as a leader of the business, acquire or invest in that help the customer more upstream and downstream. So not just at the transmission level, but at the generation and the distribution level.
And even that's changing. We used to be, most utilities are organized generation, transmission, distribution. And now with DER and a lot of things happening, those silos are breaking down because you need an integrated whole between all of them. What is the wind and solar company that you acquired?
So it's NRG Systems. It's located in Vermont, and they really have two facets to the business. So when you want to install a solar array, they make a piece of equipment that you drop in the field first that does all the measurements for about a year. So it sits back and tells you the direction of the sun, when is the sun strongest, and so then they know which direction to face it and how to make the installation. Once it's in, they have a piece of equipment that does the same thing, but then gives you data back that says one of your arrays is dirty, one of your arrays are failed. And then they do the same thing for wind farms. So what I thought was a very simple, I drop a wind farm in, I drop a solar farm in, apparently it was not. So, yeah, I have it faced that way. So they're doing a lot in the space of how to improve that type of offer.
See, and you know more about that part of Doble than I know. So there you go.
I had to know one piece.
Okay, that's excellent. That's good. speaking of all of that, what's happening too within the wind and the solar is now we're getting much more efficient. Okay, we're trying to say, how do I get the most out of that limited time that the sun is shining? How do I get the most out of this? We were interviewing a company earlier that makes river and tidal power. Okay. They can provide, with the existing hydro, they can provide 10% of the world's power need, and they just put these, like a pontoon boat on a river, and then they sink it. And then it's got a generator, they run a cable up, and then they distribute that. And it is fascinating. Yeah. Relatively new, the technology is not patented by anybody, but it's taking off of the old, going out into the tidal basins and but the same thing happens. You have to measure the tides, but it's predictable. It becomes base load distributed energy resource, which is totally new. That's the kind of change that's happening in the industry.
Yeah, and I think where we're going to end up, because they are two separate businesses, you'll see Doble will continue in the utility space, and we'll be looking at the solar and the wind as a renewables business as a separate business. So these two businesses under me, but they're run separately.
You mentioned a little bit earlier when you were talking about the sexiness of getting it in, and I think your daughter said something to you when about your career change here?
So having been involved in oil and gas for many years, and prior to that, the plastics industry, when my daughter found out that I was getting into a business that was helping power utilities and then wind and solar in the renewables, she said she was finally proud of something that I was doing.
That's just fantastic. My kids, I have two sons that are in their 30s, and they've said to me, when will you stop? Why don't you stop? One of my sons lives in London, one lives in LA, I live in Atlanta. Why don't you just travel and come see us? And I said, well, I do travel, I do see you, but I love what I do, and I'm in a changing world, and it's great to be part of something that works. Okay, you and I are at 35,000 feet on our flight from Boston to Atlanta, and we've had a nice conversation, and then I say to you, and this is your overall, this is not your Doble experience, but this is your overall experience. What do you think the big problems, the storms on the horizon, once we solve supply chain, once we start to figure out all this integration of DER and everything, decarbonization begins to work, we're not going to solve it all in 10 years, but let's assume we're on this track to do that. What do you see the storms on the horizon that you're going to have to lead Doble through 10 years from now?
I think for me it's going to be talent, and it's going to be finding the right people coming out of college that we can attract into the business, recruit into the business, because I still believe, while we think it's sexy because we're in it now, right. I don't think it's a sexy business for your average person graduating. So one of the challenges I would say I'm starting with today, but even going forward, is how do we educate that younger generation that this is an industry that you want to be in, and it's an industry that is not only sexy, but fast moving and helps. It helps the world. Yeah. And wanting to have, clean, reliable, secure power for the entire world is a powerful message. So we need to find a way to drive that into the youth.
2 years ago, I was interviewing somebody from a major utility, and that year they hired more data scientists than they did double E's, which is phenomenal, because the utility industry has always hired double E's. They have a certain number, go get 100 of them. They hired more data scientists, which your point about the massive amounts of data that people are going to be dealing with. One of the things that I know Doble is working on, and one of the things that I know Doble is probably one of the best at, was turning data into decision data, that I can look at it and say, this is the right decision to make, to turn something off, to power it up, to whatever, particularly transformers.
Yes.
You're trying to figure out, should I keep running? Hey, nobody runs it at what they were told to run it. Everything, the grid has been running it overload for a long time.
Forever. Yeah.
And you got to know, is that overload going to shut that transformer down and half of Houston's going to go dark, yes. Right? So there's some huge risks that people are making decisions based on. So data decision making, talk a little bit about that.
So I was involved in where I worked priorly in condition-based monitoring. So sort of the same semblance of, I have all the data, but what do I do with it? And one of the things, in walking around here, I saw more booths around people that were claiming to saying, yeah, we can take all your data, we can combine it and put it in one sort of display and then give you the actionable insight back. The challenge is, do they have the talent and the knowledge of the industry to be able to create the proper insight? So I think for the short term, I think we'll be providing data to the customer that they'll have to act on, and I think the next phase of that will be, we'll begin to make recommendations to them, but they still make the ultimate decision. I think a software package making a decision for a grid or a utility company is a long way away, because I think that's you're putting a lot of trust in AI at that point. Not saying we shouldn't go there, we won't get there, but I think it's going to take iterative steps.
Yeah, that was another thing 2 years ago. AI was everywhere.
Yep.
You don't see it a lot everywhere now because people realize, wait a minute, we need to get through machine learning before we get to this whole AI type thing. Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been great. Thank you for having the interview with us, Matt. I appreciate it, and good luck to you in your role.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. This has been an APC Technologies production, and we thank you for joining us. Our sponsors have been H2Scan and Distributech. And of course, the communities of APC Technologies, which is Transform Technology, Power Systems Technology, Green Energy Technology, and Women in Power Systems. So thank you.